mute myself now.
Oh, and let me do that for a second. So in general, feel free to use the chat to speak up or to ask things or speak up, but I'll put everybody on mute if I can figure out how to do it here in a minute, which I can't. Oh, here it is. But feel free to you can unmute yourself. That just means that you're not accidentally talking and don't realize it. So we don't get too much feedback.
Well, good evening, everyone. We wanted to welcome you all to Dr. Mark Ragins' first published book entitled Journeys Beyond the Frontier, A Rebellious Guide to Psychosis and Other Extraordinary Expenses. Now, that gives me occasion to gripe again about the length of Mark's title. Like, and other extraordinary experiences. Really, you really had to.
You want to know why?
Okay,
I'll tell you why I put that. It's because I think some people who have what many people would call psychotic experiences wouldn't call them psychotic themselves. I wanted people who had unusual experiences that they don't think of as being psychotic to feel welcome as well, and part of things that, I mean, you might think that you heard God talking to you, and that wasn't psychotic, that was a spiritual experience, but it's certainly an extraordinary experience. So I wanted to make so you didn't have to medicalize your experience or turn it into the word psychosis to be part of the book.
That was a planned prompt, everyone. So when we talk about the intended audience, once again, Mark's keeping in mind how to reach out to everyone who might come across this book, and we'll get more into that later in this book launch. Many of you know Mark as the 27-year tenure as medical director at the Village in downtown Long Beach, a program of MHLA. Some of you are aware that Mark currently is a psychiatrist at Cal State Long Beach for the serving the student population there. Mark's had a variety of accolades and awards that are incredibly impressive, including the Arnold Van American, excuse me, everyone mute theirs, please. I was talking about the Arnold Van American, is that correct? For psychiatric rehabilitation. That's kind of like the Best Picture award in the Academy. I'm told in the psychiatric world, you can't do better than that. A distinguished fellow by the American Psychiatric Association, but most of them know him as Dr. Mark. And so at the Village, Mark was one of the major voices, visionaries, architects of a recovery model that's had a significant impact in mental health. We'd all like to believe that's still rippling out there today. Many of you have seen him in trainings and presentations, or perhaps aware of his articles that you may have read that are on his website now. Before we get started, one other comment I want to make about Mark and this book is years ago when I was working along with Mark there at the Village, we were talking about our whole program and our approach, and I was using the word treatment a lot, like, okay, so who are we treating and how are we treating them? Mark was using the word healing, which I gotta say that word healing was a little too big for me, a little too scary and pretentious, or like, wow, how can anyone ever really talk about healing? But over the subsequent years and through reading this book, I really come to recognize how that's really what Mark's approach is about. Among many other things, it's multifaceted, but there's certainly a healing approach that Mark is shooting for and describing in this book. So as Mark said, Please feel free to use the chat to pop in any questions. We had a quite robust dialogue the other night on the book launch. So feel free to chime in if you'd like, just to ask Mark as he gets rolling with this. So I'll just ask him a few questions. And as I said, don't hesitate to get involved if you'd like. So Mark, how long would you say it took you to write this book?
Maybe 30 years. Wait, we got a weird echo or not? Just so I remember at the very beginning of the village that we we realized that we were kind of in a magical moment, and that we were doing things that might just disappear after a while, and that we were doing things that were special, and we wanted to capture it somehow. And Shelley was leading us, and we were going to put together a book, and we were each going to write a chapter, and it never really happened. And it never really happened because it turns out, one, if you're busy working, you're too busy to write a book. And two, because writing a book takes an enormous amount of perseverance to keep going with it. It struggles along the way. We had another episode, maybe 10 years later, where Joyce Thompson was going to help us write a book that also went down. And then there was a writer, Jim Wilworth, he was at the Village writing an article for Time magazine about us. And he fell in love with the place, ended up coming back for years, volunteering at the homeless center and doing a writing workshop for our members. And on the side, he and I put together a book, and we did it the way you're supposed to do it. We put together a proposal, and we put together a couple chapters and who the audience is, and he had an agent. We took it to publishers, and all we collected was a pile of rejections. And the one I remember the most said, "I'm sorry, we just don't publish books about this kind of subject. They're just not interested," which is a really interesting and subtle form of discrimination in its way. Because if you look actually a book, if you just put an Amazon or psychosis, schizophrenia, about half the books you get are horror books. They're not books about how to help people or how people have done well with one thing or another. So after a couple of years of that, Jim gave up because he didn't think it would ever be publishable. And then I joined a writing group at my local Barnes & Noble bookstore for several years. And if any of you have ever done that, or that is the most emotionally difficult thing I've ever done, of going to this room, bringing this stuff that you really think you've done a good job and put it together, and I've got it, and they tear it to shreds week after week after week after week of what's wrong with it. But on the other hand, many of the stories you read in the book now were crafted as part of that group along the way. And then finally, when I left the Village 4 years ago, I said, I'm never going to do this if I don't get it done now. So I took only a 4-day-a-week job so that I'd have a day to work on this, and took about 3 years to put together actually a longer book than the one you've got now. A few people, even a couple in this room, even helped me by reading that longer version along the way. Then for the last year, I've been working on cutting it, making it shorter, having an editor, having a proofreader, having a formatter, having a cover designer. And now I probably should hire a publicist, but I'm not going to do that either. When your friends say you should really write a book, nobody says you should really edit a book. You should really proofread a book. You should really format a book. But these things take quite a long time and a fair bit of money. Fortunately, Amazon now exists so that I'm able to publish this book and have it go out there. I think if it does quite well, Bezos will be not noticeably richer, and neither will I. But perhaps some bunch of people will actually get something that might help them in their journeys and growing, either for themselves or a family member or for your own practice of one kind or another. But it's been quite a long way in coming, is the answer to that.
Typically long answer, Mark. Thank you. What books inspired you to write this?
So let me throw out a few examples. One is a really old book, about 100 years old, by one of the first famous psychiatrists in America, William James. He was actually one of the founders of MHA, the original one way back then. And his brother is Henry James, a writer, who wrote a book called Varieties of Religious Experiences. And willing to take and listen to people respectfully with curiosity who had all kinds of unusual religious experiences, and put it together in a book that became a classic along the way of trying to understand. And what I really liked about this book was that he tried to understand and make sense of the different kinds of experiences people have and what that meant about us as people. And for a while, I thought I was going to title the book Varieties of Psychotic Experiences, except that I thought that was too esoteric, because how many people have read this 100-year-old book? This next one is actually not a book, but a person, is Oliver Sacks, the neurologist, who some of you may know because Robin Williams played him in the movie with the Parkinson's and Robert De Niro. And his books are terrific books that they're all a series of case studies where he really gets to know someone, what their experiences are, not just their symptoms. And then he tries to learn the science and figure out how people have looked through this historically. And then with the third aspect that comes through is how much he cares about the people he's working with. And there's terrific examples. And I thought, well, if I could capture a little of the magic he has. And the third one is a book most of you may probably have read, actually, is Elizabeth Kubler-Ross's On Death and Dying, who's another psychiatrist who went and talked to people nobody else thought were worth talking to. People who are dying of cancer. And she put together from talking to them what they actually needed and wanted, what would actually help them. And that actually changed our whole way of dealing with people with cancer and a whole different system of the hospice care, which in my most grandiose moments, I say, hey, maybe we can use all these insights from all these people and their experiences to create a widespread way of actually helping people in the way they need so they can live with dignity.
So, Mark, just a comment about, what inspired you. And when I think of those books, is one thing I really enjoy about your style of writing, it's just very personal and accessible. So for those of you who haven't yet taken the plunge and started reading that, don't let the girth of that book intimidate you. It's lots of stories, as you'd expect with Mark, but just that very non-academic, dusty approach when talking about such an intensely human experience. So, Mark, you touched on this in the very first snarky comment I made, which is, who do you think of as the intended audience for this book?
So this goes also the title. I think the audience is anybody who psychosis is not within their comfort zone and yet has some reason to care about the people experiencing psychosis, or you're experiencing yourself, or you're trying to help someone. And frankly, there's very few people whose psychosis is within their comfort zone. I met a student a few weeks ago who was telling me how rather calmly and in some detail how in the last couple of years she started to hear voices and think people were talking about her and getting more and more paranoid and how it's going. And she thought it's coming and going enough that she thought she should start some medicine now. And I said, you're so confident in this. You're not like freaked out about this. You must have some reason this is within your comfort zone. How can you talk like this? And she says, yeah, my mom doesn't admit it or agree to it, but she hears voices and she's paranoid all the time. And I've grown up with her and seen how it affects her, and she functions well. And so it is within her comfort zone. She knows about this. But for the vast majority of the rest of us, we don't. And so the book is really for anybody, whether you're, a policeman or someone down at the park, or wanting to help someone who's homeless, or a judge or a mental health worker or a family member, anybody who wants to be connected to people who have psychotic experiences, or you're experiencing them yourselves, and you aren't comfortable with. So you can travel to this area with them, and I can help guide you to help you get there. I want to make one last comment about the audience, though, is I didn't realize to the very end of the book that I'd written this actually to a much younger version of myself as the audience. That when I was in college, I was really interested in psychosis. I don't remember why. And I took a bunch of psychology classes and neurochemistry and neurophysiology and neuroanatomy classes and stuff. I even did a paper about what the comparison between people who have schizophrenia, people who use hallucinogens, and people who are mystics and meditate. except that it was a really bad paper because there was virtually nothing in the library about any of this. And when I got to medical school and residency, there was hardly anything to read about this stuff either, about how you really connect. I remember I was desperate enough, I went to a lecture by infamous R.D. Laing, who I found his books to be incomprehensible, and in person he was even more incomprehensible. I couldn't tell if he was psychotic or blessed or something. He was talking about that it can tell people when the planets are aligned and you need to love everyone with schizophrenia. So I went up afterwards to talk to him and I said, you know, I'm in a hospital where I lock up people all the time and they're always mad and we're forced to take meds and there's court things and all that stuff. Loving someone with schizophrenia, that seems really hard to me. How do I do this? And he said, just keep at it. You'll get there. I think if I would have had, this is a book I wish I would have had way back there, and I would have been a better psychiatrist a lot long ago if it would have given me some direction at the beginning.
Makes sense. Hey, Mark, we have a question from Janice Cohen about what impact you hope your book has on clinical practice. So the Village had produced some pretty good outcomes. Do you think your book will change this?
Welcome, Janice. Glad you came along the way. Janice is a crusader for things to get better for forever in her life, I believe. And I think recovery in this kind of humanizing approach will forever be a rebellion and pushing against the establishment, pushing away the way things have always been done, sort of thing. And I'm hoping this will be yet another effort to impact some people. That some people, you never know what'll impact people. Somebody may be impacted by reading the book along the way. Whether it influences just people helping the few people around them, or it influences the whole system, I'm not sure. But I do think they are more overlap than you might think, because recovery is a grassroots movement. It's made of lots of individuals changing more so than it's made of any particular policies. Not that there aren't policymakers. You were involved, I think, Janice, in Ohio in a significant effort. So on my arrogant days, I think it'll change the whole world. It'll be a giant revolution. And on my less arrogant days, I think, you know, a few people read it and it might help them.
Mark and I have talked about who the audience is, and one of the things we've been left with is people who read books. That feels like a dwindling audience sometimes.
It has been interesting. I've gotten a bunch of feedback of, so we've sold actually over 200 books at this point. And I think many of them are people like you all who like know me or friends or something. So you're not actually all book readers. So then I get comments back like, are you going to do an audio one, or could you do a few YouTube videos, or maybe you could give us shorter one that I could like skim through and just get the main points. That was my older son's point of view. But my favorite response on this came from Erin, who's in the group today, who, when she read it originally, said, this feels like curling up with a nice blanket and stood in front of a fire with a cup of hot chocolate. It makes me just remember the time we were working together. And I have to ask, so how many of you actually curl up with a book anymore? Leave, give or take, whether it's a fire or beach or anything. If you curl up with your cell phone, this might not be the right product. So when you're trying to help me market this book or get it out there, see if you can think of people, you know, like Margaret's got a whole stack of books just sitting there behind her. So she's probably a good audience member, unless they're just for decoration. Because, and I'm less, I think I may try to do some other little versions of this sort of thing, try to do maybe, you know, little talks or a YouTube or some other things, but I actually love books. And I actually even love the pace of books, of being able to share some time with somebody and be in their world. And they're being, like, I didn't mention 2 other books I love. One is called In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, which is about a guy who works in Vancouver with people with drug addiction, and one that's called The Body Keeps Score, about trauma, that are both very leisurely, very comprehensive, very humanistic things that you don't get out of an hour presentation of either of those 2 doctors or something like that. So I'm glad I spent the time to actually capture this moment and this moment that we have, this and way of looking at people with psychosis.
Mm-hmm. Well, I really like this book a lot too, but I don't see curling up in front of a fireplace with it. I got to be honest about that. Mark, why did you call it a guidebook?
So I was trying to figure out how to write this book all together, whether it should be, you know, like, how do you write a book that's got like 100 characters in it? Or to make it really capture stories of all kinds of people. It should be like a couple of theirs in the narration, or my story in the narration, or the village's story in the narration. And I got the idea one day about making a guidebook the same way travel guidebooks are. And if those of you who know me know that Terry and I and the family, we travel like all over the whole world. We've been like this, I don't know, 60 or 70 countries, anywhere from Antarctica to Iceland. And before I go anywhere, I go and read guidebooks. And they give an idea of what's there, what you might find, what attitude of different things, and then some details for planning your own journey and some practical assistance. And I thought, you know, I'm asking people to travel in the land of psychosis, and this is the reason for that beautiful cover that Kaja did. In the land of psychosis, like you're going on a trip to Italy, except that this is weirder than Italy. Maybe it's like a trip to Kazakhstan or something. Then you really need some more introduction of what, you know, what is there to see here? What is this about? And I also wanted it to be from a bunch of different perspectives, not just my favorite guidebook of just the art of Kazakhstan or the architecture of Kazakhstan or something. I could have written a much smaller book with just my one favorite chapter, which is the developmental chapter about losing your balance. But if you look at the bookshelf of guidebooks of psychosis, it's not like the shelf of going to New York or Paris or something. It's like the guidebook shelf for going to Kazakhstan. There's one book on this shelf, Surviving Schizophrenia. It's been there for 50 years. I read it when I was a resident. And it's an extremely medical model, narrowed, take your meds point of view with very little else in the book. And I said, you know, that's not really going to help people explore to find out, wait a minute, I could look at this in a lot of different ways. I could come at it from trauma, I could come at it from drugs, I could come from mental illness, from all kinds of different things, and really explore that. So I wanted it to be a guidebook, and I set up the chapters even like a regular guidebook. The first third is about introducing what I think psychosis is and what I'm rebelling against and who I am, and kind of an over it. Then the next is the actual journeys. Actually, let me spend a second and show you that one for a minute. If I can make my share screen work for a minute. Let's see if I can make this work. Hold on. First, my advertisement page. By the way, it's in mediocre shape, but this afternoon I just launched my website at markragins.com. So the village papers are up there along my college, my Cal State Long Beach ones, and something about the book here, and about trainings and some videos, but that's not what I wanted to turn this on for. Here's a list of journeys. So pretend you're going to Paris. You could go there as an art lover, as a foodie, as a historian, as a literature person, as a lover, as anything. Whole bunch of different choices. So these are the choices of journeys within this book. And you might say, what's loss and grief doing on there? Because that's actually the most, it's like a weekend trip. Because lots and lots of people have experienced very strange things that could be called psychotic when someone close to them dies. You like hear their voice around or see them in the corner talking to you, or think you see them everywhere, that you don't really believe they're dead, or time starts feeling really weird. We don't worry about that too much because almost everyone recovers from that kind of grief. But it's a good introduction to how this isn't like some strange thing that can't affect any of us. Psychotic reactions is about if something really traumatic and overwhelming happens to us. Difficulty making sense of the world is kind of a more biological one about how is it you hear voices anyway? How could that happen? How do you make sense of time? How do you make a picture of things? Childhood trauma, I was taught, wasn't part of psychosis at all. But it really is. People have severe trauma have like 7 times as much chance of becoming psychotic later on than people who don't. Let's talk about how that might happen. Losing balance is my developmental one that says, can you fall apart back in your teens or when you're trying to develop relations with other people? And this is where I put in spiritual psychosis, when you're drowning in deep spiritual waters. Drugs and alcohol certainly can lead to psychotic experiences, and psychiatric illnesses can too. Lots of psychiatric illnesses, as well as brain damage or neurologic or medical things can as well. And I think this is a way of having lots of different routes. Then the third part of the book is, all right, now you understand what you're looking for and where you're going. How can you recover in a good life? And how can we put in some practical things about, how about poverty? How about violence? How about suicide? How about families? How about picking a psychiatrist? How about hospitals? The practical things of how to deal with things you come up with. And so that made it, putting it together, made it a fat guidebook of a very large land.
And Mark, were you also going to, at this point, talk a little bit about the triangle of schizophrenia, or is that a little later?
That's, I can. That goes in. And actually, let me emphasize one thing there to go to that one is, I've had a few people say, how many of you guys, your favorite word of the title was the word rebellious? Nobody in this group liked the word rebellious? Oh, there's a couple of people down there. Actually, we got a few at the bottom of it has it. You are a select unusual group who like the word rebellious along the way. And I believe there comes some more people. They're just in the dark there. That if you want to do anything better than it's been done before, if you want to do anything not just in the same old way it's always been done, it has to be rebellious. Otherwise, you're doing it the same way it's always been done. And so this book is filled with rebellious stuff in it. Some of it's my own innovations, things like thinking about psychiatric hospitals as refugee centers, or trying to do harm reduction for suicide prevention, or talking about social connectedness and violence, or talking about using medications in a way that has meaning for the individual person and goes for their goals. And I put rebellious, including rebellious people in here, people like Patricia Deegan and Dan Fisher have recovered from schizophrenia, people like Nev Jones, who has psychosis and is a schizophrenia researcher, and rebellious programs, things like Open Dialogue from Finland, and like Voice Hearers from Holland, and clubhouses, things that aren't part of the normal system in general. And my biggest rebellions is what Wayne was alluding to a minute ago. Let me put back on the share for a minute to show you. Is two things from the beginning of the chapters. Where is it? One is this compass. So this is my trying to be metaphorical, a compass on the way you go to. So psychosis, that word was invented in like 1850 or something like that to mean they got something really wrong with them and we don't know what it is. And it's kind of scary. And then Kreplin comes along and says it's kind of hopeless. And Bloiler comes along and says we can't even connect to them. And Freud comes along and says, yeah, I don't use psychoanalysis for people with schizophrenia either. It's not going to work. And before we know it, we've given up entirely. So the first things we need to rebel against are to stop being so fearful and avoidant of them. People with psychosis aren't any more dangerous than anyone else. They're not going to drive us crazy. We're not going to make them worse by talking about to them. There's plenty of good data that shows just an hour a week of befriending someone with psychosis makes their symptoms go down by a third, even if you're just talking about nothing. If you actually talk about something helpful, it works even better. Instead of doing diagnoses that don't have any understanding in them, come up with formulations of how did you get this way? What happened along the way? How did this develop? Why are you experiencing this? Instead of isolating people and coercing them in hospitals, how about connecting them and collaborating with them? And instead of being hopeless and helpless, how about helping people grow and hope to recover? Because most people will actually recover. It's harder when you're a place like the Village or with a homeless center than it is actually at Cal State Long. We try and be in the beginning. But there's no reason you can't be rebellious and say, just because it's always been to be frightening, ununderstanding, disconnected, and hopeless, we have to move on from that. We have to rebel from that. And my other big rebellion is to say psychosis isn't just about hallucinations or delusions or paranoia. It isn't just about the way you're experiencing reality. Psychosis has three parts to it. and they all have to fall apart. It's not just that, it's, oh, what happened to your identity, who you are, your life started drifting away, and your relationships, did you end up all isolated or paranoid? And any of these things can be the reason you started falling apart. You know, there's that prodromal time when people fall apart for a couple of years before they start experiencing reality strangely, when their self-identity and relationships are struggling. Any of these things can be the weak one that lets you fall apart entirely. Any of them could be the one that actively improve to get out of it. Almost all those rebellious programs I talked about in the nerve of the book are programs that work on self-identity, like voice hearers, how do you have an identity while you're hearing voices? Or relationships, like open dialogue, how does your family stick with you while you're experiencing reality strangely? Or Clubhouse, which is both of those, self-identity and relationships. And any of them can be the strength that keeps you from relapsing and going on like that. So those are my two biggest rebellions, is to say, stop being hopeless and fearful and disconnected and not understanding, and stop seeing it so unidimensionally. And then we have a chance to really understand what's going on and actually help people along the way and be connected with them.
You know, Mark, Janice asked a question about any comment about just the diagnosis of schizophrenia.
So so I think in general, I much prefer to do formulations and diagnoses. I'd much rather understand, how did you get to here? What happened along the way, than to give a label for what you're experiencing right now or what symptoms you have right now. The schizophrenia label was made up by Bloiler in about 1920, and he wasn't even talking about hallucinations or delusions. He was saying, I'm a great psychoanalyst, I can get along with all kinds of people, and these people I can't connect with, I can't understand, I don't know what's going on, I can't seem to help them. And I think that the meaning underneath the word schizophrenia today is still, these people are strange and I can't connect them, I don't think I can help them, I think they're hopeless. They have classic schizophrenia, so it must be hopeless. I don't even know how you figure out if that even exists, or that's just a prejudice.
And Mark, a follow-up question is, what's your opinion or view about people recovering from schizophrenia, fully recovering?
I think the majority of people recover. And recovery looks like, did you get those three things put back together? Can you make sense of reality in a way that works along with everyone else? It doesn't have to agree with everyone else. You can still hear voices, or still believe that you're from a different planet, or the people are doing things, or that you're here on a special mission. But do you have relationships going? And do you have an idea of who you are and what your point of life is? And I think if we stop focusing so much on convincing people how to get rid of your symptoms, that's how many people can be cured. And we focus on, can you recover a life? Can you recover meaning? Can you recover an identity? Can you recover connections? The answer is yes, the vast majority of times. I think it'd be even more often yes if we were designed to create that as the outcome. And if we gave it lots of support and we weren't so scared of these people.
You know, Mark, in the earlier slide, you mentioned the helplessness and hopelessness. I think I told you I was sharing, a colleague was sharing with me how much helpless and hopelessness that she was seeing in her work. And I said, yeah, well, that's true of a lot of patients that have psychosis. She said, no, I'm talking about my staff. And I really thought there was just a lot of truth to that.
The very first review of this book on Amazon, this from someone I don't know off the top of my head, said, I'm so glad that Dr. Mark didn't fall into the trap of being hopeless and helpless like everybody else who writes about schizophrenia. I don't think we have to start from a point of hopelessness.
We do have that big hammer. Yes. Hey, Mark, let's get, I've been telling you.
Uh-oh, your internet's struggling a bit, Wayne.
Did you hear the question?
No, I didn't. Try it again, Wayne.
Did you hear the question, Mark?
I heard that question. I just didn't hear the question
It was,
before.
why is the book? Oh, no, that was, I don't know, but let's go ahead and move
No,
on to
I'm
that
being a
burning
smart ass.
question.
I didn't hear the question.
Okay. Why is the book so damn long?
So I think the main answer to that is the business about the guidebook shelf being empty. I could have written a shorter book just on my favorite part or about recovery. And then there would have been one book about the medical model and one book about developmental or person in recovery. And it would have seemed like I'm creating a battle between the two. Say I'm anti this and the two are battling. But in fact, only a small portion of people would have accepted either of those two approaches. At this point, that bookshelf is so empty. I think it needs a broad guidebook that says, hey, you can think of this as psychosis or not. You can think of this as an illness or not. You can think this has to do with drug abuse or not, trauma or not, medical things wrong with you. You're out there. Let's see if we can find some guidance that would fit who you are. And I think the diversity of people's experiences, the diversity of the approaches you need to engage people, that the bigger the menu is, the broader the choices are, the more chance you won't be arguing with someone and trying to psychoeducationalize them into your way of thinking or saying they don't have insight because they don't agree with you. I would have been just as guilty as the people who write the medical model books if I wrote just one journey and then said, how come you guys don't agree with my one journey?
What can we do to help you get this book in front of other people, Mark? How can we help promote it?
So, thank you for that question, and thanks for that. I think for one thing is to think of
it's totally an unprepared question, by the way.
Okay, good. I think for one thing is keep it in mind. I don't think this book will spread in just a month or something. I think it's something to keep in mind as things go on, as you see other opportunities or things come by, and you're looking for three different kinds of people to share it with. I think one is the one you said already, is people who read books. People who put it on their bookshelf, that's nice, but that's not actually going to benefit them very much. You can, send them toward an article or toward a YouTube or something. You have to be a book reader to read a long book. Second thing is, can you send to people who know a lot of people? There are people in this world who are connectors, who know lots and lots of people, to connect other people, to spread it out, that are kind of influencers. Think to yourself, who do you know who's connected to the most people who's interested in psychosis? And can you spread the book over to them and say, hey, can you help spread this around? Because it's going to have to be a grassroots thing, spread, linking by ripples and waves like this sort of thing. And the third thing is, not so much can we help make it sell a jillion copies. Can you give it to people who you think it would make a difference in their lives? That they're struggling with their kid, or they're a new social worker, a new psychiatrist, or a nurse starting along. Somebody you think would make a difference in where they're going to say, hey, yeah, it'll take you a while to read this, but I think it'll be worth it in the long run for who it might have a personal impact. Because in the end, I'm more trying to have a personal impact than have be sitting in a textbook someplace. Not that textbooks can't have a personal impact could be a student in a class too.
Mark, I really want to underline the one audience that you just mentioned is family who have loved ones who are going through something like this, that such a heart-wrenching and frightening time for them. Oftentimes the person going through the experience is way too overwhelmed, perhaps, to read a lot of books, but
we're losing you. I think, by the way, if you're sending a family,
you can't put family members.
We lost you. I think if you're sending to a family member, or actually sending to anyone, it's okay to send pieces of this. For instance, the few of the early readers, my sister sent the piece. She's a child psychologist. She sent the piece about how do you emotionally prepare to deal with people with severe childhood trauma to a couple of her interns who are working with her at the child clinic. Paul sent the piece about challenges for families to someone who's a dad of a man who has schizophrenia, who was on our board. You can send pieces to students in your social work class. You can send, pieces to someone you happen to know, because somebody may be especially interested in, let me understand what that diagnosis of schizophrenia means. That's the journey I'm on. That's what they put me on. Someone else might be really interested in, how does spiritual psychosis work, or spiritual experiences? How do you drown? Someone else may be really interested in, what do you think about different kinds of drugs and alcohol? And you don't need to necessarily, everybody doesn't have to read the whole thing. If you can help tell them, say, I think chapter 8 would be really helpful to you, to pay attention to this if you know somebody who you're working with.
Thanks, Mark. Go ahead, Jane, if you'd like to jump on in here and ask a question.
First, I'm impressed Jane knows how to use the hands raised.
I'm on Zoom most of the time nowadays. Thank you so much for presenting this book and this Zoom today. It's given me a lot of hope. My question is that if you want to divide it into small pieces for people who are interested in it, could you put it on blogs on Instagram, the different chapters, and then with the hashtag or some kind of a link back to your website, and then also to so that people can get the book, so that if people are interested in one part of the chapter, and it wouldn't be so hard.
There's another really good idea for my summer projects.
And the other,
I like that a lot.
the other question I have is, do you teach right now? Are you teaching?
I do a couple things. One is I still do some workshops and trainings for various groups. Right now, there's a few people on this call from Union Station. I've been doing monthly trainings that actually will be on the web. I do a few conference things or things, and I do a little bit of guest talking in social work classes. I've taught in Tom's class a few times in the past, and I'm talking in some of the social work classes at Cal State Long Beach. And actually with Zoom, I end up in other things. Like I did a grand rounds for the University of Southern Alabama a couple months ago, and I talked to the psychiatry fellows, community psychiatry fellows at Columbia University about a month ago. So I do bits like this. I don't do a whole class of anything, but lots of trainings and workshops. Anybody, once we're done with this pandemic, if you live in an interesting place and you get a little money and send me a plane ticket, I'll go to lots of interesting places like that.
Well, I think you're not going to have any trouble getting the book out there. I think that's brilliant. My suggestion is that a lot of survivors in Los Angeles County are actually trying to find alternatives to the system. And we've gone, in my life before I got so sick, we'd go to colleges and universities and talk to social workers, classes, occupational therapy, and also high schools. And would it be possible to connect to an advocacy group that like Painted Brain or something, and then have them take this book in? This book is incredibly important for us survivors, that there gives a professional view of kindness, I guess, is how I would put it. That in my life there hasn't been a lot of kindness by psychiatrists whatsoever. In fact, I would say I'm a total activist against psychiatry. You've given me a different viewpoint. But if we could get the books in to the colleges and the universities, to the freshman class, so sophomore classes, that it would be very beautiful. And the third thing is,
Wait a second. Let me respond. Wait a second, Jane. Let me respond to your second one because I don't want to forget it, and I thought it was really important. Is that I would love to be connected to various advocacy groups. It is hard that some of the advocacy groups, as you point out, have become anti-psychiatry, and so there has to be a little work up front about a psychiatrist coming and it's connecting, and I'm reaching out, and I'm not trying to be anti-psychiatry. I'm trying to be broadening of things. I'm anti a bunch of things that are happening. But yeah, like I love the painted brain group, and any group I'm open to being kind of partnering or doing things with them. I think there's a whole set of people that are like that. I was part of the Access, I think it's called, the consumer statewide group I did a presentation for earlier this year, and I'm very big on being part of consumer advocacy groups scattered around.
Thank you very much. I just appreciate your writing this book. I'm very, very excited. I haven't read it yet, but I am definitely going to read it, and thank you.
Either take it to a beach or curl up by a fire. No. Thank you, Jane.
That's great feedback, Jane. I think compassion is a real hallmark of this book. I'm glad you pointed that out, that really comes through. From a complete stranger to you, Mark, we have this question from the left field of what personal significance does it hold for you that you actually finished the book? I mean, what does the book mean to you?
Who asked that question? I mean, it's funny. It was more important when I was doing it than now it's done, which it doesn't actually surprise me that much. So any of you who've ever tried writing a long book or something like this, at least for me, and I think most people, you flip wildly between it's going to be a giant bestseller and change the whole world. Everyone will love it. And Oprah will be on, and I will be able to, have a private jet after this. To going, well, you guys who are my friends will buy some, and then it'll disappear without a site, and it'll be a giant waste of time. And you can waste a lot of writing times emotionally going up and back by these various fantasies instead of actually writing. So it took me quite a long time to start writing instead of start imagining like that. And I think by the time I did several years of disciplining myself enough to writing, I've been able to kind of let go of the outcome. That for me, this is something I wanted to do as a way of saying, hey, I think what we've come up with over time is significant. I think people do deserve better treatment, and it's possible. It's not just even the word treatment. I think people do deserve better caring, better compassion, better healing, better being with them. And I do think it's possible, and I do think this is my best effort at this point to throw in to be what best it can be. And I'm proud of it. I like this book. I think it came out I ended up writing the book I had hoped to have written. It's the book I'd hoped that I'd done, and I can cut that. It's like when you do on your bucket list of things to do. That I'm happy that I wrote the book that I intended to, and I'm pleased the way it is. And I realize that it's a substantial accomplishment, if nothing else, out of perseverance, because it just takes a long time to write a book. You have to stick to it a fair bit doing it. And actually, I want to thank you, Wayne. Wayne is the person who's been in the background almost the whole time saying, hey, how's the book going? How's the book going? How's the book going? How's the book going? For years now.
And Mark also covered that he'd like Keanu Reeves to play him in the movie version of the book. So he did.
Johnny Depp was my choice, but if he's not available, Keanu Reeves is good.
Mark, how about reading a selection from the book?
Let's do that. All right, so I'm going to read one of the stories that's from the end of the first chapter. So it's part of the introduction to the book. It's a story from when I was in residency at Big County. It's called Do You Really Want to Know? Everyone in the psych hospital called John Wolfman Jack because he would make himself hoarse by yelling nonstop. So he sounded like the old radio DJ. Everyone knew Wolfman Jack, and most of the staff liked him. He had 5 volumes in his chart because he was brought to the hospital every other month. He kept stopping his medications, getting very agitated and harassing policemen, throwing traffic barricades and pounding on their cars. They kept bringing him to us. We'd patch him up by putting him back on medications and send him out to do it all over again. When it was my turn to take care of him, I didn't really feel like taking his history for the 20th time. I told him that I'd be just copying it from the last resident's admission note. But before I did, I wanted to know something. What's that? He growled. Why do you do this? Do what? Why do you keep stopping your medications, getting manic, harassing policemen, and getting thrown back in here over and over again? I leaned back, gestured vaguely, and waited for his reply. That's when he asked me the key question. Do you really want to know? Think about that for a minute, because that's always the key question, even when they don't ask it. Do you really want to know what it's like to have a child taken away and have a black hole in your heart where the tears flow out forever? Do you really want to know what it's like to have voices talk you into lighting yourself on fire? Do you really want to know what it's like to be making love to your husband and have a flashback to your father's drunken friend on top of you as a child and tighten up in terror? If you don't really want to know, they'll get the message and shut down, and you'll be of very little help. But back then I was young and naive and confident and didn't think about all that. I just answered, sure. My mother is a Holocaust survivor. She's a very depressed, bitter old woman. I live with her and take care of her, and she takes out her pain on me, making me miserable too. Wait a minute. I knew the people who were abused sometimes abuse their kids, but I'd never thought about how that applied to Holocaust survivors. I'd always thought of them as almost saintly. Now he was making me wonder how many of them abuse their kids. Talk about something I didn't really want to know. But I was already in too far to stop now. After taking a deep breath, he went on, I wish I could kill myself, but since I'm also devoutly Jewish, suicide is out of the question. So what I do is I stop my medicines, get manic, and go find the police, hoping that they'll eventually kill me and end my misery. It hasn't happened yet, but I read about police killing other mentally ill people, so I know it's possible. Did I really want to know all this? By the way, who is getting insight in this story, him or me? I took a minute to absorb his story. He seemed to appreciate that. I continued, that makes sense to me. If you don't mind, I have a couple more questions. Go ahead. First, do you think God is going to be fooled by that? I was even more of a smartass back then. What do you mean? Well, it seems to me you're still committing suicide even if you get a policeman to do it for you, except now you've made it worse by making him feel guilty for the rest of his life for killing you. He might even get fired. I never thought about it that way. This time he paused to think about it. I appreciated that. He continued, what's your other question? I could help you find someone from in-home supportive services to be with your mom sometimes. You're obviously not here when you're in the hospital anyway. I also know about a drop-in center near where you live where you could hang out and make some new friends. I noticed you like talking to their patients here in the hospital, trying to help them out. And I could see you in the clinic myself so you wouldn't have to go through a lot of paperwork. Just show up and I'll see you in between other patients to give you your lithium refills. Maybe then you wouldn't be so miserable and you could stop figuring out how to die. Would you be willing to try that? That's what he ended up doing. And he stayed out of the hospital for the next year for the first time, and he began to rebuild his life. By really wanting to know, I had really connected with him. I hadn't learned any more about his illness than any of the other residents. I had learned more about him as a person. I hadn't figured out how to improve his medications. I figured out how to improve his life. One last image before we leave Wolfman Jack. During that hospitalization, he had a birthday. The nurses who knew him well put together a few bucks of their own money and got him a cake and some candles. We all sang happy birthday to him, and they gave him a small wrap present that was a package of white socks. He broke down into tears, saying it was the best birthday he could remember. I wondered how empty his life must be if our small celebration on a cramped, physically run-down county hospital ward behind a locked door could touch him like that. Do you really want to know?
Thank you, Mark. If you haven't started this book, it's chock full of those kinds of stories. So please plunge ahead. Any last questions, comments? Feel free to chime in. You don't need me to mediate. Okay,
Hey,
that
everybody.
being.
Oh, sorry,
Go ahead,
Wayne.
Go ahead.
I just
No,
wanted
please.
yeah, I just wanted to say hi to everybody. First of all, I'm seeing so many people for the first time after so many years. So hi, everybody. I just wanted to thank you for finishing the book and writing it, Mark, because I remember, I think I asked you when I found out that you were at Cal State Long Beach, aren't you bored? Because I imagine going from, the Durban Center and the village and all of that action. And I did prejudge because, that you then explained to me how challenging and exciting it was to be at Cal State Long Beach as well. But I just think that I know so many people appreciate, all of the wisdom and insight that you've gathered for so long. And this is a way that it can be, I guess, so more widely digested and shared. And so I'm just really thankful for that. So,
Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you.
Nice seeing you as well, Sarah. Anyone else like to comment?
I have a quick question. I am planning to read this book. I'm a resident in psychiatry at NYU, and I'm planning to read this book with a little book club that we have among the residents. And I can see it kind of being perfect for that in other places too. And I was wondering if you have any suggestions for how to like discuss it and how to go about doing that with a book club. Ideally I'm imagining some kind of like little one-page guide in the future, but for now.
So first thing is, if you'd like me to, I'd be happy to show up and on Zoom and meet with you guys once in one of your meetings.
That would be amazing.
Just give me a plane ticket to New York. No.
I'm on the Zoom call.
My thought actually, and I don't know if this is right or not, it does have to do with the length and breadth of this book that goes into so many different things, that you'd be best off doing it like a chapter at a time. Otherwise, you're going to find yourself not actually talking about anything or spinning around a fair bit. You could do the first chapter to start with that. That you could skip around if you want. But and I guess the other thing is this book is designed to be the basis for further exploration. So there's lots of cool things in there you probably haven't heard of, or people you haven't heard of. And you could give like a little assignment. I know you're plenty busy with things to do, but this little assignment says, so in this chapter, was there anything there that was worth looking up more? Like, I never heard of Patricia Deegan. Who is she? Let's find her website. Who is Dan Fisher? What do they do? Rural Finland? What are you talking about? Because I've only put a few paragraphs about any one of these marvelous things in there. And it's worth, so it can be an extra exploration that says, so in this particular chapter, all right, we got the idea what he's talking about, the main thing, but which of these other little things? Or he says that Eraserhead is his favorite movie of what psychosis is like from the inside. Let's all sit and watch Eraserhead together. By the way, do not watch Eraserhead alone. Let's all sit and watch Eraserhead together some night. You can use the other things as an exploration of further things that don't think of the book as a be-all, end-all. Think of it as a launching pad for other things you guys can explore where you're interested in going along the way. And maybe you've come, you say, wait, I know some other things that do the same purpose or things.
Awesome. That sounds great. Thank you.
Thank you, Kat. Any other questions, accolades, comments?
Hi.
Go ahead, Aaron.
Hi, Aaron.
Hi, everybody. First, I just want to express gratitude to you, Mark and Terry, for this book. And Washington State is the 45th worst place for mental health services. And this book is something that I'm sharing with everybody that I can encourage to read. We have social work students, and I loaned one of the draft chapters to a med student, and she had a comment that it is more hopeful than In the Realm of Hungry Ghosts, and I believe that's true.
It is.
So in the world of prescribed evidence-based practices, this is the medicine for that, and I'm grateful for it.
Thank you.
Well said, Aaron.
Thank you. I think this is an aside, but Gabor, I think he is a more traumatized person than I am. I mean, he lived through he was orphaned in the Holocaust and stuff in World War II, and I think, you know, that's those kind of experiences. I was fortunate; I didn't have a terrible childhood, so I come at this from a more naive curiosity or a more optimistic place rather than a place of pain or fear to start with. I remember way back in residency, was like when my friends, we were talking to some very paranoid young man, and we didn't know what we were doing. And I talked him, and I was way too intrusive, got him all upset, and he ran off from the session. And there was a medical student with us because they're supposed to be learning from us, and we don't know anything as interns either. And one of my best friends was there, and she said, "Why do you talk to them like that, Mark? The people who are paranoid, just stay a little distant and stuff. You don't have to do that, you know, stay away. I just do my job and stay away from people who are quite like that." So I think one of the differences, Gabor comes from from part of his own pain, which brings compassion, which it's a brilliant person, a brilliant book. But I think I come at it more from a positive curiosity and a more optimistic point of view, because I was more fortunate in my childhood than he was.
Mark, this is Dave. I'd just like to add a couple points.
Hi, Dave.
First of all, I'm enjoying the book on a lot of levels. You know, having been a part of the village, you know, for all those years, it's really a lovely experience to relive that to some extent and hear about the stories. But it also surprised me, there's a lot of the history of mental health and the history of mental illness and psychiatry that I wasn't expecting to see in the book, and it's really quite informative on that level as well. But the thing that's most profound to me is your formulation of psychosis as a relationship illness more than a medical or a clinical disorder. I really think it captures the sense of broader isolation and ennui in the culture that we're experiencing across culture right now. We're feeling more and more distant from each other, and that was you know, not even counting the pandemic kind of thing. But I think that it's really a metaphor that if we can have a relationship with people who are experiencing psychosis, I think that's really a metaphor for having a relationship with everybody and trying to overcome some of the social isolation that everybody is experiencing. And so I think that, as somebody wrote in the comments in the chat, it's like this has meaning way beyond psychiatry. It has much more broader cultural implication. So thank you for that.
Thank you for all those thoughtful things, David. Your first one, I think it would have been worth it to have written it just for the experience of the dozen people that helped make my life so wonderful at the village for those years, to be able to have a little remembrance. If that's all it did, that would be cool. So I'm glad it did for you. I I think the other thing about the relationships, that's where my thinking has really grown at the college level, because then you start seeing, wait a second, we got this huge set of mental health problems in young people that's growing and growing out of control. And it obviously isn't a multiple pandemic of 17 different mental illnesses all getting bad all at once. But it is stuff about how our minds are developing, how our relationships are developing, how we're connecting to one another. And I think that if we can shift our thinking, that as you pointed, you could write a guidebook or use the same approach to this guidebook for lots of other areas. I wrote it in the area that, you know, as Rick Steves would say, his beat is Europe. So all his books are about Europe. But I mean, I once read a little book he wrote when he was young that was about Asia and Nepal that was totally out of print. And it was cool too. I think you can apply the same kinds of way of looking at things that aren't my beat. Now, I'm damn well positive I'm not going to write a series of guidebooks about all kinds of different things, but that I think it can be applied to, you know, what is your philosophy of travel? What is your philosophy of connecting? Your philosophy of mind, of relationships, of human suffering is not just for people with psychosis. What makes us a good traveler with each other in general.
Well, we want to thank you, Mark, for the persistence over 30 years to write this book. It's already, it sounds like, touched many people already. So let's keep getting the copies and the word out there.
And thank you all very much. I very much appreciate you buying books, you coming, you spending the time of reading, the respect that shows, and the caring about me. I very much appreciate all of your responses and being there to help read and spread this. Thank you all very much.
Okay, good night, everyone. Thank you. Have a good evening.